Was I wrong for walking out after my friend kept testing me? I feel like I finally hit my limit with a close friend, and now I am questioning whether I handled it too harshly or if it was a long time coming. My friend, who I will call Mia, has this habit of setting little tests in our friendship. She will do things on purpose just to see how I react, and later she admits it by saying she wanted to see if I would notice something or go out of my way for her. I have told her more than once that this bothers me and that I would rather she just be honest if she needs something. Last weekend we went out for dinner with a couple of other friends. At the end of the meal, we all asked for separate bills. When mine came, I noticed that one of Mia's drinks had been added to my total. She had already paid her own bill, so I decided not to make a scene in front of everyone or confuse the staff. I figured I would just mention it to her afterward. As we were leaving, I casually brought it up and said it looked like one of her drinks ended up on my bill. I kept it light and did not make a big deal out of it. Her reaction was immediate and strange. She went quiet and distant, which made things feel uncomfortable, but I did not push it in that moment. Later that night, she sent me a message saying she felt I was selfish and that she did not feel appreciated in our friendship. That is when she revealed that she had noticed the billing mistake but said nothing on purpose. She wanted to see if I would offer to cover the drink as a way of thanking her for helping me move months earlier. Hearing that made me incredibly frustrated. To me, helping a friend should not come with hidden expectations or delayed tests. If she wanted me to treat her or show appreciation, I would have gladly done it if she had simply asked. Instead, it turned into another one of her silent experiments, and I told her that directly. I said it would have been better to communicate clearly rather than turning something small into a test of loyalty. She responded by saying she should not have to remind me to show appreciation, which only made things feel more tense. We agreed to meet the next day to talk it out. I got there first, hoping we could have a calm conversation and clear the air. But as soon as she arrived, she immediately started speaking in a way that made it sound like I had done something seriously wrong and needed to reflect on my behavior. At that point, I felt completely drained. It felt like no matter what I said, I would be put in the wrong again. So instead of arguing, I stood up, paid for my coffee, and left. Later, I sent her a message explaining that I cannot keep being part of these tests and that I need friendships where people communicate directly instead of setting traps. Now I am wondering if walking out made things worse, or if it was the only way to finally set a boundary after feeling pushed so many times. Would I be wrong for calling out my manager's wedding request? I feel like I'm sitting on something that is bothering me more than I expected, and I'm not sure if speaking up would make things better or much worse. I run a very small business, and one of my managers, who I will call Rachel, is getting married in about 6 weeks. We have worked closely together for years. We talk often, support each other through stressful situations, and I have gone out of my way to help her in many parts of her life, both at work and outside of it. Because of that, I always thought we had a strong and respectful relationship. Recently, I received an email from her that caught me completely off guard. She asked if we could close the business for an entire Saturday so that she could invite the staff to her wedding. Saturdays are our busiest days by far, the kind of day that helps keep everything afloat. We have been struggling financially for a long time, to a point where I have been working full-time without paying myself just to keep things running. Losing a full Saturday of income would not be a small inconvenience. It would hurt us in a very real way. What made it harder to process was realizing that everyone on the team was invited to the wedding except for me. Even people who no longer work for the business were included, but I was not. I never expected an invitation as something I was entitled to, but given how close we have been and everything we have gone through together, it still felt personal. It is difficult not to take it that way when I am being asked to shut down the business so everyone else can attend. Since reading that message, I have felt a mix of frustration and hurt. On one hand, I understand that it is her wedding and she can invite whoever she wants. On the other hand, asking to close the business on our most important day, especially when I am already sacrificing my own income to keep things going, feels incredibly out of touch with our reality. I have not responded yet because I do not want to react purely out of emotion, but I also feel like saying nothing would mean ignoring something that does not sit right with me. Part of me wants to explain how much this request impacts the business and how it came across to me personally. Another part of me worries that bringing up the invitation issue will only make things more uncomfortable and damage the working relationship we have built over the years. Now I'm trying to figure out whether speaking honestly about how this feels is reasonable or if it would come across as inappropriate given that it is a personal event. Am I wrong for refusing extra kids at my son's birthday and losing a guest? My partner and I planned a small birthday party for our son, Evan, who just turned 8. We kept things pretty tight this year, budgeted carefully, counted our SVP, and bought just enough food, treats, and supplies for the kids who confirmed. No extras, no wiggle room. One of Evan's classmates, Caleb, didn't RSVP until the day before the party, after we sent a reminder. His mom, Tanya, finally replied saying Caleb would come, but also casually added that his 2 younger brothers, ages 6 and 4, would be coming along too. She said to let her know if that wasn't okay. The thing is, if we'd known earlier, we might have been able to adjust. But at that point, everything was already planned and paid for. We didn't have extra food, extra goodie bags, or even much space. Our house fills up fast, and we were already worried about having to move everything indoors if the weather didn't cooperate. My partner asked me if it would be too harsh to tell Tanya that her other kids couldn't come. I said no, it's a birthday party, not a daycare, and those kids aren't even in the same age group or friend circle as Evan. He's never mentioned them, then this was meant to be his day with his friends. So we told her politely that we weren't able to accommodate additional kids on such short notice. The next morning, Tanya messaged back saying Caleb wouldn't be attending at all. She explained that they do everything as a family and that he wouldn't be comfortable going without his brothers. She also added that they usually attend parties as a full group, including both parents, which she hadn't mentioned before. Now Caleb isn't coming, and I feel bad for Evan missing one of his friends. At the same time, it feels unfair that we were put in that position last minute. We live in a small town, and I know this is probably going to get talked about. Part of me wonders if we should have just squeezed them in to avoid the drama, but another part of me feels like we set a reasonable boundary. So were we wrong for saying no? Was I wrong for honouring my brother's final wish and not letting his estranged wife attend his funeral? My older brother passed away recently after years of dealing with serious kidney problems. It wasn't completely unexpected, but it was still devastating. About 6 months before he died, his wife of 5 years told him she wanted a divorce. She said she wasn't happy and wanted a more exciting life. Not long after, it became clear she was already seeing someone else. This all happened while my brother's health was getting worse again, and it hit him really hard. During his last hospital stay, he made sure everything was in order. He updated his will and was very clear about 2 things. He didn't want his estranged wife to receive anything, and he did not want her at his funeral. When he passed about a month later, we followed those wishes. On the day of the service, she showed up, but we didn't allow her inside. It wasn't about creating drama, it was about respecting what he had explicitly asked for. Since then, she's been calling me heartless. Some of her family members have also been messaging me, saying I went too far and had no right to keep her from saying goodbye. A lot of the anger also seems tied to the fact that she wasn't left anything in his will. He had arranged for his savings to go toward my daughter's education instead. We haven't tried to stop her from visiting his grave or doing anything else privately. The only boundary was the funeral itself, because that was one of his final, clearly stated wishes. I understand that grief is complicated, even for someone he was separating from. But at the same time, this was something he felt strongly about and made clear before he died. Was I wrong for honouring that? Am I wrong for continuing to smoke on my own porch? I feel stuck between wanting to mind my own business and not wanting to create tension with my neighbours. I own my own detached house. There's no shared building and no community rules, and the homes are spaced out with a decent amount of distance between them. I usually keep to myself and try to be considerate of the people around me. From time to time, I smoke on my screened-in porch. It is enclosed and somewhat private, and I try to be mindful about where I do it. If I notice my neighbours outside, I usually wait. I also try to choose times when the weather helps carry the smell away. It is not something I do constantly, just occasionally during the day or in the evening. Recently, while I was on my porch, I overheard my neighbour loudly complaining about it. She was talking to her husband and saying she could not believe what I was doing, that she might come over to confront me, and that she was going to take action. Her daughter was encouraging her, which made the whole thing feel more intense. Hearing it got me off guard and honestly made me uncomfortable in my own space. Part of me feels like I'm being judged unfairly, possibly because of my age. I also use it for personal reasons, and I am aware that the smell can be strong, which is why I try to limit when I do it. At the same time, I am on my own property and not breaking any rules where I live. Now I am questioning whether I should change what I am doing just to avoid conflict, or if it is reasonable to continue as I have been, given that I have already been trying to be considerate. I do not want to escalate things with my neighbour, but I also do not feel like I should be pushed out of using my own space. Was I wrong for telling my future sister-in-law her opinion isn't more important than mine? I am getting married this September, and I've honestly been having so much fun planning everything. My fiancé and I both have pretty different interests, so we decided to make the wedding feel really us by weaving in subtle references to things we love. He's super into coding and tech stuff, and is obsessed with The Matrix. I'm more into movies, especially things like Breaking Bad, award season films, and I love Ariana Grande. So we worked with a wedding planner to include small, hidden nods to those things, like little details in the invitations or decor that you wouldn't notice unless someone pointed them out. Nothing over the top, just fun, personal touches. Last week, I invited my mum, future mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and my sisters to one of our planning meetings. Everyone seemed to like what we'd done except my future sister-in-law. Out of nowhere, she said we should cut all of it because it was tacky and that we should aim for something more classy. My fiancé calmly explained that this was something we both loved and had planned together. She didn't let it go. She started listing off changes, saying we shouldn't have chocolate cake, that it should be strawberry. That my dress shouldn't be a princess style because it's too 80s. That I should dye my hair brunette because it would suit me better. It stopped sounding like suggestions and started feeling like instructions. At that point, I told her plainly, everything she just suggested changing, I actually like, so it's staying. She went quiet after that, but later pulled my fiancé aside and told him I was being disrespectful and that I should value her opinions more, apparently because she's always dreamed of planning a wedding and I'm her future sister, so I shouldn't exclude her. Now she's really offended, and my fiancé suggested maybe I should apologize to keep the peace. I didn't think I did anything wrong, but I'll admit I can be a bit blunt sometimes, so now I'm second-guessing myself. Was I out of line for shutting her down like that, or was I just setting a reasonable boundary? Am I wrong for refusing to give my apartment to my dad's partner after everything? I grew up in a pretty messy family situation. My parents split when I was young, and my dad remarried. Over time, things got strained between us, enough that we were basically estranged for years. A big part of that was financial. My dad makes very good money, but he avoided contributing to child support or helping with me and my siblings' education. My mom carried most of that burden. I moved a few hours away for university to finish an arts degree. During my final year, there was an issue with my student housing that made it temporarily unlivable. I was already supporting myself with part-time jobs, and suddenly I had nowhere to stay. My options were drop out 6 months before graduating and move back home, or stay in the city and figure it out. I stayed. For a period of time, I was effectively homeless, couch surfing when I could, and otherwise just getting by however possible. My dad was aware, at least generally, of what was happening. He never offered help. Eventually, the housing situation got resolved. I moved back in, and I finished my degree. Fast forward a couple of years, I moved back home briefly, worked 2 full-time jobs, and managed to get into an extremely competitive clinical graduate program. I also saved enough to get my own apartment near my school. I'm currently living there while completing my master's. Now here's the issue. My dad recently reached out asking if his partner could stay in my apartment for a while because she has a relative in a nearby hospital. On paper, I understand the situation is stressful for them. But I live in this apartment. It's not sitting empty. The thing is, they absolutely have the financial means to stay somewhere else. In the last couple of months alone, they've gone on 2 international vacations. Meanwhile, during the entire 7 years I've been pursuing my education less than 4 hours away, they've never once come to visit me. I've tried to politely say no and set boundaries, but they keep pushing. On top of that, they've started criticizing my financial decisions, saying it's wasteful to keep paying for my apartment if I'll be back home working over the summer for a bit, basically implying I should just let them use it. This whole situation is bringing up a lot of old resentment from me. Growing up, there was clear favoritism and some pretty unfair treatment, and it feels like that dynamic is still there. Like, my needs and boundaries just don't matter. At the same time, part of me feels guilty. There's a medical situation involved, and I know that's serious. But I also feel like I've worked incredibly hard to get to where I am entirely on my own, and I don't want to give up my space, especially to people who didn't support me when I needed it most. So am I wrong for refusing to let them stay in my apartment? Would I be wrong for keeping my dorm instead of switching? I am in a situation that is making me feel guilty even though I am not sure I have actually done anything wrong. At my boarding school, students get to choose their dorms, and I ended up with a really great setup. My room used to be a double, but because people complained it was too small, the school turned it into a single. That means I have my own space and a private bathroom, which most single rooms do not have. It also happens to be in a convenient spot near the laundry room and faces a nice area on campus. I chose it carefully, and I get to keep the same setup each year, just on a different floor. Recently, a new student arrived, and she has autism. Before break, she came to talk to me and asked if I would consider giving her my dorm. She explained that my room would suit her needs better because of its location, layout, and how it feels. She also shared that she lives far away and has to stay on campus during weekends and shorter breaks, unlike me, since I live close enough to go home often. On top of that, she is still new and does not have a strong support system here yet, so she spends a lot of time in her room. I could tell this was not an easy thing for her to ask, and it made me feel bad. I even spoke to the school about it, and they told me that I am not required to switch, but I could move into another available single if I chose to. The thing is, I really love my room. It feels comfortable, familiar, and honestly, I picked it for a reason. Giving it up would mean losing a space that works perfectly for me. Now I feel torn. On one hand, I understand why she wants the room and I feel for her situation. On the other hand, I chose the space fairly, and I am not doing anything wrong by wanting to keep it. I cannot tell if holding onto it makes me selfish, or if it is reasonable to keep something that I was given the option to choose in the first place. Was I wrong for starting my class on time when another group wouldn't leave the room? I'm a university instructor, and I teach a class that runs Mondays and Wednesdays from 4:30 p.m. to 5:45 p.m. I usually arrive early, around 4 p.m, to get set up since the room is typically empty well before then. This week, when I showed up at my usual time, another class was still inside finishing a presentation. No big deal at first, we still had 30 minutes, so my students and I waited outside. By around 4:20 p.m, they were already on their final slide taking questions. But instead of wrapping up, the discussion kept going. Around 4:25 p.m, my students and I started making eye contact with people inside and subtly gesturing toward the room, hoping they'd realize another class was about to start. They noticed, but kept going. At 4:30 p.m, my scheduled start time, they were still deep in discussion with no sign of ending. So I told my students we were going in because it was officially our time. When we entered, the instructor leading the session said they needed another 30 minutes and claimed they had booked the room until 5 p.m. That didn't make sense to me, since I have that room reserved from 4:30 to 5:45 every week. Then they changed the story and said they were actually booked until 4:30, but either way, they were clearly running over. From my perspective, if there's any chance your session might run long, you need to plan for that, either by booking extra time or moving discussions elsewhere once your slot ends. It shouldn't fall on the next class to wait around indefinitely. So I went ahead and started my class at 4:30 as scheduled. Now I'm wondering if that was too rigid, or if it was reasonable to insist on using the room at the time it was reserved for my class. Would I be wrong for stepping back and letting my brother face consequences on his own? I'm 21 and my younger brother is 19. We're both autistic, but we function very differently. He struggles a lot with emotional regulation and gets angry very quickly, sometimes over small things, like correcting people for using the wrong word, for example, insisting it's a sofa instead of a couch. I can understand having strong preferences or sensitivities, but his reactions go way beyond that. He often insists he knows what other people are thinking better than they do, and will immediately tell people they're wrong, even when they're not. Even if you repeat something he just said for clarity, he'll still argue that you're incorrect. Conversations with him can feel impossible. I've tried to be patient and approach things calmly, asking questions and trying to understand him. Sometimes that works, but it's exhausting, especially when he turns around and tells me he understands my thoughts better than I do. If anyone challenges him, he escalates quickly into yelling. The bigger issue is that this behaviour has never really been addressed. Growing up, whenever things got difficult, he could say he was too tired or overwhelmed, and that would end the conversation or responsibility. I absolutely understand autistic burnout and shutdowns, I experience it too, but in his case, it often feels like a way to avoid accountability entirely. My dad's approach has always been to avoid conflict. If my brother gets upset, the rest of us are told to leave him alone and stop causing problems. I'm often blamed for situations even when I'm just trying to communicate. It's gotten to the point where I question my own perception of what's happening. Right now, I'm the one driving him to college every day because he says driving overwhelms him. If I don't take him, he likely won't go, he said as much himself. He already skips classes because he stays up until 4 a.m. most nights. He uses a VR headset late into the night, which keeps me awake, and then I'm expected to drive him in the morning if he decides to attend. I suggested he try the free therapy services at his school, but he hasn't followed through. Meanwhile, I'm losing sleep, struggling to find time to work, and watching my own mental health decline. When I've brought this up with my family, the response is always, "He's an adult, what can we do?" But at the same time, I'm being expected to support him like it's my responsibility. My dad has even said if I don't like the situation, I can move out, which I can't afford to do right now. I care about my brother, and I worry about his future. But I also feel like continuing to carry this responsibility is enabling him and hurting me in the process. So I'm considering stepping back, focusing on getting a job, taking care of myself, and no longer driving him or managing his responsibilities, even if that means he fails out of college. Would that make me wrong for choosing my own stability over continuing to support him? Did I overreact at a festival when my partner took a stranger's side? I'm a 25-year-old woman, and recently I went to a large medieval-themed festival with my partner and my cousin. My cousin and I attend these kinds of events all the time, but it was my partner's first experience. These festivals are very interactive, people dress up, shout, cheer, and play along with the performers. It's part of the atmosphere. During a tournament-style show, I was doing what I always do, cheering, calling out support for one of the competitors, and just enjoying the moment like everyone else around me. At one point, a man sitting in front of me turned around and said I was too loud and that I was upsetting his child, asking me to turn it down. Before I could even respond, my partner stepped in and told me I should probably lower my voice. That immediately rubbed me the wrong way. It felt like he sided with a random stranger instead of backing me up, especially in a setting where being loud and enthusiastic is completely normal. Someone else nearby even leaned over and said the man was being unreasonable, which made me feel a bit validated. Still, I felt embarrassed and frustrated, so I decided to step away to cool off. My cousin came with me. It didn't feel like a big deal at the time because we had already planned to split up after the show for a while to explore different parts of the festival and meet back later at a designated spot. A few hours later, my partner found us and was clearly upset. He said I had left him stranded at an unfamiliar event and that I should have adjusted my behaviour if a child was uncomfortable, regardless of the setting. I didn't see it that way. In my mind, I was acting appropriately for the environment, and I didn't think it was fair to single me out for something that everyone else was also doing. Plus, we already had a plan to go our separate ways for a bit. The situation escalated into an argument, and now I'm wondering if I handled it poorly or if my reaction was justified. Was I wrong for continuing to smoke outside after my neighbour escalated things legally? My partner and I rent a detached home in a quiet suburban neighbourhood with decent space between houses and fenced yards. We don't smoke inside the house at all, only outside on our back patio, usually in the morning with coffee or occasionally during the day. It's not constant, just here and there. A few months ago, one of our neighbours started complaining about the smoke. At first it was just comments, so we tried to be respectful. We moved where we sat outside and even tried smoking in the garage with an air filter to minimize any impact. That still wasn't enough for her, so we stopped doing that and kept everything outdoors again. Things started getting more intense. At one point, she actually climbed up high enough to see over our fence and recorded me while I was outside, criticizing me out loud about what kind of example I was setting in front of my kids. That felt very personal and invasive. Then she posted about us in a local neighborhood group, openly saying she recorded me and pointing out which house was ours. A lot of people who saw it didn't agree with her and said we had the right to do what we wanted on our own property, which made the situation even more uncomfortable. More recently, she yelled over the fence that she had hired a lawyer and claimed that multiple neighbors were backing her up. Shortly after, our landlord received a formal letter accusing us of creating a nuisance and affecting her health, with threats of further action. For context, we're not in a shared building, there aren't specific rules banning smoking where we live, and we've made efforts to be considerate without completely changing our habits. At this point, it feels like things have gone way beyond a simple neighbor disagreement. I understand that cigarette smoke can bother people, but being recorded, posted about publicly, and now dealing with legal threats feels extreme. I'm trying to figure out if I'm being unreasonable by continuing to smoke outside, or if this has crossed into something else entirely. Was I wrong for asking my friend to pay me back after she left me stranded? I'm in my early 30s and had a long-time friend I call Nina. We'd been close since we were teenagers, along with 2 other friends, Marcus and Joel. The 4 of us used to do everything together, but over the years I started noticing a pattern with Nina, especially when it came to Marcus. She always seemed overly focused on him. If he dated someone, she would pick them apart or make passive-aggressive comments until things got awkward. Eventually, that same energy started getting directed at me. She'd make little remarks that made it feel like she was competing with me over who mattered more to him, even though I never saw it that way. I ignored it for a long time because I didn't want to ruin the friendship. Recently, Marcus got married, and Nina and I travelled together for the wedding and shared a place to stay. Almost immediately, the same behaviour started up again. She made comments about how I wouldn't even be there if it weren't for her, even saying it in front of other people, which felt unnecessary and embarrassing. Later that night, back at where we were staying, she started complaining that Marcus hadn't spent enough time with her during the wedding. At one point, she actually said that even though we were all there, he should have made more time specifically for her. That's when I finally said something and told her that was a strange thing to say out loud. She didn't take it well. She got defensive and started insisting that she and Marcus had always been closer than anyone else, bringing up random examples to prove it. I told her I didn't care who was closer, but it was weird that she seemed so fixated on it. I also made a comment that it felt like she had feelings for him, which definitely escalated things. She stormed out, and instead of coming back later, she just left entirely. She drove off without me, even though we had travelled together and I had no way to get home on my own. The next morning I was stuck several hours away with no realistic options. I couldn't rent a car due to payment issues, so I ended up having to book a last-minute flight, which cost me around $900. I messaged her afterward explaining what happened and asked her to cover the cost since I wouldn't have needed the flight if she hadn't left me there. She never responded, and we haven't spoken since. We're supposed to talk soon, and while I know what I said wasn't the nicest, I still feel like being stranded like they crossed a much bigger line. Now I'm wondering if I was wrong for expecting her to pay me back. Was I wrong for saying my partner's mom's mashed potatoes were weird? I've been with my partner for about 5 years, and his family does big Sunday dinners pretty regularly. I go most weeks, and everything's always been fine. Last weekend, his mom made mashed potatoes. I grabbed some like usual, took a bite, and immediately noticed they tasted sweet. Not slightly sweet, like noticeably sweet, almost like a dessert. I kind of laughed and said, "Wait, are these sweet?" Because I genuinely thought maybe I was imagining it. She said yes, that's just how she makes them. So I replied, "Oh, I've never had sweet mashed potatoes before." I wasn't trying to be rude, I was just surprised. But the whole table went quiet in a really awkward way. I tried to keep eating them, but I honestly couldn't get past the taste. It just didn't work for me, especially with gravy. So I stopped and focused on the rest of the food. Then she noticed and asked if I didn't like them. I said, "They're just a bit sweet for me." At that point, my partner jumped in and said they weren't sweet, which confused me because they definitely were. Then his mom made a comment along the lines of some people just aren't used to real cooking, which rubbed me the wrong way. So I said, I just didn't expect mashed potatoes to taste like cake, and that's when everything really went downhill. Dinner got super tense after that. We left not long after, and in the car my partner told me I embarrassed him and that I should apologize. But from my perspective, I wasn't rude at first, I only got a bit sharp after she made that comment. Now she's upset, and he's acting like I caused the whole situation. Did I handle this badly, or was my reaction understandable?